Welcome, age of vintage society. Jimmy Stewart won the hearts of audiences everywhere with his "aw shucks" charm, making him one of the most popular Hollywood actors of all time. With a career spanning decades, Stewart represented an entire American generation. But what was really going on behind the scenes? How did Jimmy Stewart's trauma after serving in the Air Force affect his career? Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Jimmy Stewart, the warm-hearted American hero. For a good portion of the 20th century, actor James Maitland Jimmy Stewart was one of Hollywood's most popular leading men. James Stewart presents small-town upbringing, major Hollywood figure for decades, decorated war hero, faithful husband and loving father, untouched by scandal. Acting was not James Stewart's only area of expertise. Growing up in Indiana, Pennsylvania, where his father owned a hardware store, Stewart had an artistic bent with an interest in music and earned his way into his father's alma mater, Princetown University. There he received a degree in architecture in 1932, but pursuing that career seemed tenuous, as the country was in the midst of the Great Depression. Instead, Stewart decided to follow his interest in acting, joining a theatre group in Falmouth, Massachusetts, after graduating and rooming with fellow aspiring actor Henry Fonda. After a brief turn on Broadway, he landed a contract with MGM for motion picture work. His film debut as a cub reporter in The Murder Man was released in 1935. At first, Stewart's slow, halting line delivery, perhaps his most readily identifiable trademark, and angular features made him difficult to typecast. His unpretentious, engaging manner, however, led to quick acceptance by the movie-going public. Stewart was loaned to Columbia for 2 Frank Capra films that proved pivotal in his career: You Can't Take It With You and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the latter of which brought him his first Academy Award nomination for his portrayal of a shy, idealistic young senator fighting corruption in Congress. He won an Oscar the following year for another film classic, The Philadelphia Story. Stewart was already established in Hollywood when the United States began preparing to enter World War II. After the draft was introduced in 1940, Stewart received notice that he was number 310 out of a pool of 900,000 annual citizens selected for service. The problem? Stewart was 6 foot 3 inches and a trim 138 pounds, 5 pounds under the minimum weight for enlistment. So he went home, ate everything he could, and came back to Wayne again. However, in his spare time, Stewart was flying planes relentlessly and got his commercial pilot license so that he could join the Air Force. His initial attempts failed because he was too skinny, despite trying to fatten himself up on ice cream and chocolate bars. It worked, and Stewart joined the Army Air Corps, later known as the Air Force. Stewart was finally called up shortly before the assault on Pearl Harbor in 1941, which forced America into World War II. Asked by his studio boss why he wanted to give up his life in Hollywood, Stewart said, "This country's conscience is bigger than all the studios in Hollywood put together, and the time will come when we'll have to fight." Stewart was initially put in the Air Force Motion Picture Division because commanders wanted to use him to make films, to convince more airmen to sign up. He was also used for PR stunts until he demanded that he see combat like other airmen. Stewart's chance came with the creation of a B-24 bomber group, the 445th, and he was appointed commander of the 703rd Squadron. Thanks to his interest in aviation, Stewart was already a pilot when he went to war. He received additional flight training, but wound up being sidelined for 2 years stateside, even though he kept insisting he be sent overseas to fight. He filmed a recruitment short film, Winning Your Wings, in 1942, which was screened in theatres in the hopes it could drive enlistment. Finally, in November 1943, he was dispatched to England, where he participated in more than 20 combat missions over Germany. His accomplishments earned him the Distinguished Flying Cross with 2 oak leaf clusters, among other honours, making him the most decorated actor to participate in the conflict. After the war ended, he returned to a welcome reception in his hometown of Indiana, Pennsylvania, where his father had decorated the courthouse to recognise his son's service. His next major film role was It's a Wonderful Life. As we stare headlong into the approaching holiday season, the 1946 James Stewart classic It's a Wonderful Life is set to make its annual television appearance every year. It was the first movie Stewart made when he returned home after serving as a pilot in World War II, an experience that left him adrift and not without psychological fallout. Pilots who flew with him said that he became flak happy during World War II, a term to describe what is now known as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Jimmy Stewart suffered such extreme PTSD after being a fighter pilot in World War II that he acted out his mental distress during It's a Wonderful Life. Stewart played George Bailey in the classic movie and channeled his anger and guilt into the scenes where he rages at his family. Stewart was haunted by 1,000 black memories from his time as an Air Force commanding officer that he took with him back to Hollywood after the war. Stewart wrestled with the guilt of killing civilians in bomb raids over France and Germany, including one instance where they destroyed the wrong city by mistake. Stewart felt responsible for the death of his men, and especially one bloodbath where he lost 13 planes containing 130 men who he knew well. Stewart never spoke about it even to other veterans, and bottled up his emotions that came out in the acting parts he chose when he returned to Hollywood. He acted it out during It's a Wonderful Life, where character George Bailey unravels in front of his family. The emotional core of the film, after a lifetime of setbacks, including being unable to go to war while his brother becomes a decorated hero. Films like Shenandoah and Winchester 73 allowed Stewart to explore his dark side, which was never there before he went to war. Stewart's decision to join the military was less surprising than his decision to become an actor. His grandfather fought in the Civil War, and more distant relatives fought in the Revolutionary War. He wasn't afraid of bombs or bullets. He was afraid of making a mistake and causing someone to die. That was his endless stress, and that's what ended up grounding him. Which is to say that much of George Bailey's angst was, to some extent, Stewart's own. Before agreeing to do the film with director Frank Capra, recently back from the war himself, he considered quitting acting altogether. It's a Wonderful Life helped set him back on a path in Hollywood. The war had changed Jim down to the molecular level. He could never begin to articulate what those 4.5 years, including 15 months in combat, had done to him. One thing he could do was express a bit of it on screen. As he approached age 40, it was clear that Stewart could no longer maintain the naive young innocent persona he had established in his pre-war films. His collaborations with directors Alfred Hitchcock and Anthony Mann helped toughen his image and broaden his appeal. Of Stewart's Hitchcock films, the experimental Rope and The Man Who Knew Too Much are well regarded, and Rear Window and Vertigo rank as masterpieces. For Hitchcock, Stewart embodied an American everyman, albeit one whose private quirks and obsessions threatened a tragic outcome. The film Stewart made for Mann proved the actor capable of rugged Western roles, especially in the classics Winchester 73 and The Man from Laramie. Stewart and Mann collaborated on 8 films, including 6 westerns and the sentimental biopic The Glenn Miller Story, which was one of Stewart's most popular movies. As one of America's biggest stars, Jimmy Stewart had no shortage of dates at the ready. He had relationships with beauties like Ginger Rogers and Loretta Young, but none of them ever quite worked out. Young even once chose her other boyfriend over Stewart because she felt that the actor would never be ready to settle down. The story of Jimmy Stewart and the beautiful actress Margaret Sullivan is worthy of a tear-jerking Hollywood movie. Stewart was immediately smitten with Sullivan when he met her in college, but sadly it was doomed to a heartbreaking end. Sullivan only saw him as a dear friend and married Stewart's agent in 1936 instead. Jimmy Stewart didn't marry until he was in his 40s, and people definitely took notice. Gossip columnist Hedda Hopper even dubbed him the Great American Bachelor. During the late 1940s, Stewart was among several actors who enjoyed success on Broadway as the ingratiating inebriate Elwood P. Dowd, whose best friend is an invisible 6-foot rabbit, in Mary Chase's Harvey. It became one of the actor's signature roles when the play was adapted for the screen in 1950, garnering another Oscar nomination for Stewart. He repeated the role in the show's 1970 Broadway revival and in a 1972 television movie. Stewart found good roles difficult to come by as he aged, but he remained one of America's favourite actors, thanks to his many appearances on talk shows, in commercials, and in 2 short-lived television series, The Jimmy Stewart Show and Hawkins. He was also memorable in a supporting role in the John Wayne western The Shooties. His final acting assignment was to provide the voice of the character Wiley Burp in the animated feature An American Tale, Fievel Goes West. In 1985, Stewart was awarded both an Honorary Academy Award and the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honour. On July 2, 1997, the 89-year-old Jimmy Stewart died of heart failure. It was far from a lonely end. He went surrounded by his family and friends, and all of America mourned his passing. As President Bill Clinton commented upon the news, the country had lost a national treasure, a great actor, a gentleman, and a patriot. We couldn't agree more. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think James Stewart might have struggled with such traumatic memories?